Bonjour tout le monde. Vous m'entendez bien? Merci à tous d'être venus ce soir à TheFamily. On va continuer en anglais. Donc on commence à faire tous nos événements en anglais parce qu'on ouvre d'autres villes européennes. La première étant Barcelone, dans laquelle on a fait notre premier voyage il y a un mois. Et pour qui on va commencer à créer du contenu. Donc toutes les problématiques, donc quand les Français conquièrent les États-Unis, ça va être valable pour les Espagnols, les Portugais, les Italiens et tout un tas d'autres pays. So English now. So tonight we're very happy to have you here. I don't know who never came to TheFamily. Is there anyone? So welcome here, we'll tell you how it works. So this is one of the special workshops we host for startups and for anyone in the ecosystem. Tonight we're going to speak about French startups and European startups conquering the US and the world. We're going to see how these guys made it. So the Wi-Fi is TheFamily. The password is LamiFacici. It's written here. Please use it. Don't be afraid to disagree with us on Twitter. The hashtag is TheFamily Workshop. We are always pleased to have you comment on it. So my name is Balthazar. I'm a partner at TheFamily. I've been here for more than a year. But you guys didn't come for me. You came for the awesome panelists we have tonight. So tonight we have Paul. Paul started in Paris doing consulting and private equity. Then he moved to Stanford for his MBA, worked for a couple American companies, did some angel investing, and now he is the venture partner for ISAI in New York. He will tell you more about it. Hervé has been doing a lot of business, starting as a sales manager and going up to VP sales and ops for an American company. And now he started StickyAds 6 years ago. They have 7 offices and they just opened one couple months ago in New York. And Julien is the CEO and co-founder of CTO and co-founder of Algolia. He's been doing Algolia for 3 years now, and before he was an engineer at Exalead. So he's one of the guys we consider the Exalead mafia here in Paris. They went to Y Combinator 1.5 years ago, and they're now based both in Paris and the US. So they will all tell us more about how they went international, what their experiences with the US, and what French people should do there. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to ask a couple questions to them, and then you're going to have some time to ask questions too. So thanks for being here also. The first question I want to ask you, you three, is to tell us a little bit more about your company and to tell us if you feel your company is an American one or a French one. Thank you.
Is it working? Yeah. So we develop a search as a service API that we sell to software editors worldwide. We started in France three years ago. Today we have about 60% of our revenue that come from the US, but we sell to more than 100 countries worldwide. So we are definitely an American company with an American culture, and even in our French office in Paris, we have several nationalities. We only speak English. We have American in the French company, but different nationality, Italian, Czech, and several international profiles.
So I'll start with the second part of the question. Is it working?
Hi. I'll start with the second part of the question. I don't think we're American or French, we're global. I have personally a background of living in different continents. I lived in France, in Germany, in Hong Kong, in Asia, and now in the US. And one of the things I'm very proud of is building an international culture. I think it's very hard for a French company to be American or to be anything else, so we're just trying to be global. By this, I mean we have offices throughout Europe. So we have 6 offices in Europe, in the UK, Germany, France, Italy, and Spain, and 1 in New York. And what we're trying is to build a culture of our own, not really, whether it's a French or whatever. It's our own culture, and we think it's a global culture. When it comes to the company, we're a software company. We're building a software that helps video publishers who have video content to monetize it by basically creating a marketplace in which they sell in real-time video ad placements. So it's the online advertising business. And we sell that ad placement in real time in an auction fashion. So essentially, if you're a user, you go on a site, you click on the video player. At that very moment, you don't know it, but you create an ad placement. It goes into a private exchange, and it gets auctioned to thousands of advertisers, and they make a bid in real time. All of that within 100 milliseconds.
Was it working? Yeah. So we're a very French company because we're ISAI. So I mean, I don't think it's like a very French VC. Now I've been spending 10 years of my life in the US, in New York, and in California. So although I'm actually French and I was born in France, they all consider me an American, at least at ISAI. We opened the office 6 months ago, and so I'm supposed to bring the American side to ISAI. And for me, it's actually really interesting because the investment culture that exists in France is very different than the investment culture that exists in the US. And the valuations are different. VCs are looking at like different types of metrics. So trying to combine both cultures is not always easy. But a VC is not at all a very global or international business. It's fundamentally a local business. So I would say we're primarily French, and I'm American. I'm also very proud to be French, but I'm fundamentally American.
Okay, great, thank you. Do any of you have, as a business that wants to move to the US? Okay, so regarding that, one of the questions I would like to ask you is it necessary for any business to move to the US, or do you have some businesses that should stay here because the conditions would be 10 times better here than in the US, or maybe you should go to East rather than West? How do you feel about going there as a mean or as an end?
That's a very good question. I lived in Asia, and I think we as Westerner, we really underestimate Asia. I think the world is shifting east. But when it comes to my business, unfortunately, this part of the world is not quite advanced, so it's better to go west. Why? So the question for us is not really about going to the US specifically, it's about becoming a global company. In the advertising world, you are only a regarded company or global company if you are big in the US. No matter how big you are elsewhere, if you're not big in the US, you're not a big company. So we've decided to go global, and therefore the US was absolutely required. And then there's another element, is the economy of scale. We have today about 30 engineers and growing. About 35 to 40% of our headcounts are actually engineers, and there's no way on earth we can actually make a living, decent living just running a business here in France or even in Europe. So if we really want to scale bigger, and it's a highly competitive market, so we have to keep investing, and if we want to pump more money into the system, we have to go to the US. No, it's a no-brainer. It's not an easy one though, but it's a no-brainer.
For us, it was similar. Our market is definitely global, and to be big in the global market, we had to be in the US, and mainly on West Coast, because we are an API, and all the API providers are mainly on West Coast. So the decision for me to go in US is definitely depends on the business. For us, it was definitely mandatory to be in the US and to be on West Coast. Then the question of time is important. For us, we have founded the company in France, and move the company to the US later on. It would have been easier to build the company in the US first, have our first investor in the US, investing in the US company, and keep the office in France. Today we have moved the headquarters in the US, and we continue to recruit a lot of people in France. There are advantages and drawbacks for both countries, actually. Engineers are easier to attract in Europe and in France than it is in the US. It's an ultra super competitive landscape with a huge amount of companies, especially in San Francisco. It's super difficult to attract them and to keep them. So definitely having an office in both countries is an advantage in this context. But I would say it really depends on the context. The only advice that would have been good for us is to, in our context, build the company in the US first. It would have been easier.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it depends on what the company does and at what stage the company is. And so just like one company that I think is pretty amazing is BlaBlaCar. And they're actually probably not going to go soon in the US because it doesn't actually apply to the US to do like the intercity type of like transportation that BlaBlaCar is doing. But on the other end, for like some companies that are doing something that will be B2C, for example, starting in France is probably not the best idea because it's very hard to actually mimic the consumer behavior and mentality from France and try to say like, I'm going to translate that into the US because those are fundamentally different mentalities. For B2B, I think that it's like what Hervé did is probably like something that's, you know, like probably something that's more, that's easier for like a company to actually do because the software is something that you can develop in France and then you can actually like shift it to the US. But the one thing that everybody needs to keep in mind is that whatever you built in France or even in Europe doesn't matter in the US. So you can have the biggest name and biggest references in your portfolio. You can even make a lot of money. When you come to the US, it doesn't really matter to them. They probably don't know the name of any one of your clients and they won't care about them. So sometimes there's a lot of French people who come and they'll say like, hey, you know, I have a Carrefour, Auchan, whatever, like Fnac, whatever you want, like name it, right? And Americans don't know any of those names. And so for them, they won't acknowledge that. And so there's a question for everybody to just decide at what point, like success in France does not mean that they'll recognize that as success in the US, right? They're just, that's the way they are.
So you think you'd rather move early on because the references you're going to get here are not useful and you better focus on references there that can be used in Europe too?
Well, I think that it's very hard to move in the US, just period. So I think that to build at least your product in France in the early stage might actually sometimes be easier. Again, it's just a question. If you go to the US and you've like never built anything, you also likely have no network. And so it's pretty hard for you to just go and like raise money out of nowhere. So just like keep in mind, like if an American comes here, they don't know anybody. And it's like, I'll give you even my example. I left 10 years ago. And besides the past 6 months that I've worked with ISAI, I had zero network in France. It just had no network left. And if I had wanted to do anything in France, it would pretty much be impossible for me. Besides now, like carrying a card that's like, you know, something that people like. But that's it, right? So the same thing for like you when you come to the US out of nowhere. So I think that it just depends on like how hungry you are. You need a lot of money to move to the US even with nothing. Just because like the visa costs money. And then you have to like, you know, nobody's just like the rent cost, like the rent's really high. Everything is high in the US. And so I think that it's just a question of like where you like want to be. If you absolutely want to be in the US, you can move. If you can build something in France, it's going to be a lot cheaper to build it. Maybe like as a legal, you know, structure, you can decide to like, you know, incorporate it in the US, but actually like build it mainly in France. But building anything in France is a lot cheaper than building anything in the US. Just a lot cheaper.
Yeah, yeah. So that's what we see for most of the consumer companies here. If their market is really in the US, we advise them to incorporate there and start the business there because the investors are also the only one that's accustomed to this kind of businesses and able to finance the growth before having any revenue, more than any investor here. And same for companies like Algolia, where they sell to mainly to startups and tech companies, and where the whole ecosystem is important, then they'd rather move to the West Coast rather than the East Coast.
Just one thing on the consumer, just to like be mindful that the reference levels that they have are humongous. So even if you have like some metrics that are interesting, like now there are examples, the points of reference are going to be Snapchat, Yik Yak. So things that are like so fast growing that if you do something that's in consumer, they have all the references of the world of like the fastest growing companies, and now they're going to compare you to those companies. So it sometimes like, you know.
Something good is in the US is 1 million user in a couple months as consumer.
Yeah, I mean, like right now, like if you just say like I have like 10,000 downloads, they look at it as a pilot. Yeah. Like it's cool, it's a prototype, it's cute, and then they won't fund you for that, right? And so I think those are things like to keep in mind in terms of like the one example sometimes I give to like French people, like I don't know if like the ones who are not French here, is that it's like akin to like when you were in the lycée, and then you decided, I don't know, to do a class prépa, and you were first in class in the lycée, and when you went to class prépa, you're obviously not first in class anymore. It's the same thing in the US, right? You may be the best person, the best company, the fastest growing in France. That does not compare, not even close, to anything that's currently happening in the US, just because the market is bigger and everything is bigger.
So Julien, you said that if you had to do it again, you might incorporate in the US first, build the company from here, and then move there, but just move the team and stay with the corporate office there. What does it mean regarding BPI, JEI, CIR, and all the French things we have?
So my personal opinion about all these way to finance a company is that it does not have any impact on the success. So it means today we don't have any of those, and we don't use any of those until today. We might reconsider that in the future, but I don't think it had any impact. If you think about the success of the company and think about building a successful business, I don't think it's a small tax refund that will make the difference. When we see all the cost of having an engineering team and a company in the US compared to France, even without all of those tax refunds, it's cheaper. So that's a fact. So then after you can have some more advantages, but I don't think it will be the fact that will make the company successful. But just to give some more things about the previous questions, for us it was key to build our references in parallel in Europe and in the US. Having some reference, some big company that use a product takes some time, and you need to learn how to pitch your product to in a country, and the pitch in France and in the US is pretty different actually. So having learning how to sell the product was for us key, and actually it was key to learn how to pitch it in the US, as it has impacted a lot the way we present in France and improves the kind of conversion of prospect to paying user even in Europe and in France.
Did you have any big reference in the US before going to YC?
Actually, big, I would not say big, but we had dozens of customers in the US, and about 4 or 5 of them were YC company. So it made a big difference. Actually, one of them, the CEO of the company, was a YC partner. So it's a lot about networking and be used by startups in the ecosystem. So moving in the US without any network, without any reference is totally different than moving with a user base, with an existing network, and leveraging this network. It's totally different.
I'd like to add one word on what we were talking about. Unlike most companies, we're actually a French company still today. We are 80 people. We operate in 6 markets, as I said earlier. We're now pitching US VCs, and we realize that not being an American company is hard because it actually shrinks the pool of potential VCs who can actually invest in our company. And the bottom line is we are now at a crossroad, which is, do we flip the company or so make it a US company, or do we continue as a French company? I'm not going to disclose any revenue numbers, but we're doing pretty big numbers now in terms of revenue, and flipping the company is a multi-million-dollar cost. Just in lawyers and making sure that everything is actually on par on either side of the pond. Plus, there is more to it. We have stock option plans in Europe, and those stock options are, in French we say BSPCE, but we have the equivalent for non-French residents. All of that would go down the drain, and we would have to basically scrap everything and rebuild everything from the ground up. And we know, when you know that the equity is a very important remuneration element for anyone who joins the company, if you actually scrap the entire stock option plan for the existing employee, it's a big issue. So today, as a company, we haven't decided what we're going to be doing. Unfortunately, we didn't make the decision early like you guys, so we have recurrent business now, and it's not an easy decision to make.
So for everyone, to flip the company means you change the headquarters from France to the US, meaning that at the end you're a US company, and usually you have to do it because American investors are not investing in anything else than C corps in Delaware. So they ask you to move there before they invest. So that's what Algolia did just after YC, or just before?
Just before. At this moment, the company was pretty young, making a very small amount of money, about 5,000 a month. But we already had some investment and already have stock option plan with BSPCE and so on. Honestly, it was super long, and the cost was not super high. It was 30,000, something like that. But it took 2 months with a lot of times, and being focused on the business and not on the flip is critical at this moment in the company. So doing it even earlier than us would be even better. We were far early in the process compared to other company, but even for us it was kind of painful.
So that's why you say you should have incorporated in the first day there.
Yeah, definitely. For us, having the company, a US company since day one, would have been better.
I just want to add something on the. Traditionally, everybody thinks like Americans don't want to invest in France because like it's kind of like French bashing and like French economy, and they're afraid of France. But the reality is that they just don't want to invest in anything that's not American, just because it's easier for them, and because they're like trying to understand the different legal system is just a lot of work for any like venture capitalist, and it just adds more work, and there's not really any need for them to actually do that. And it's already hard sometimes to like understand the full extent of like the American system. So that's mainly why they're just asking people to like become an American company, not because they're thinking that France is like less flexible, or it would be Germany, France, UK, any one of those countries. They pretty much just like say, look, I mean, I really know this thing very well. And the other thing that's interesting is if you look at like the term sheets, so the investment memos like of VCs, they're a lot more templated than in France. So they know something like works like within the confines of like the traditional way they want to invest, and that's the way they're going to do all their investments. All their investments, or pretty much all of their investments. So it's not them saying like, I don't want to invest in France. It's not interesting. They don't work or anything. I mean, some of them say that, but they're not like French bashing from that standpoint. They just really know one type of investment. That's why.
It's also an extra cost because they need to hire an army of lawyers to actually translate the governance of that foreign company into something they understand. And for every single board meeting there is, everything needs to be translated, not only from a language perspective, but also from a legal standpoint. It makes it incredibly complex. It slows down everything. So very, very few VCs are actually doing it. But the good news is there's one French big company that did it. They didn't flip, it's Criteo. And they managed to raise money in the US while remaining a French company. But yeah, I mean, the pool of VCs who are actually able or willing to invest is not big. I would say probably it's 20 or 30.
So if it works on this side, it's the same thing the other way around. Meaning your French VC is not going to be very happy if you flip to the US because he's going to assume all the extra charges also. No? So
I'm going to let Paul comment on that. I think the French VCs are okay. as long as the equity piece is taken care of, meaning that our employees are happy and we're not screwing them because they don't get any stock options anymore, and they understand that the bylaws don't change. If the bylaws are written in a way that it's comparable to what they have today, it's fine.
Yeah, I think that so my experience of like the French VC is like pretty recent. I'm more used to the US VC part of the world. But what's interesting is that the valuations, the exits, the IPOs and everything, most of it happens in the US. So flipping it in the context of like basically getting the fund raised in the US is actually something pretty much like any French VC is very happy about, as long as everything looks like great and that they don't get squeezed out like in the middle of the process. But again, as I was saying, like the world is flat and they both want to be like global companies, but VC is primarily US after a certain point. And if you like specify the amount that you're trying to raise and it becomes like a real large amount, it actually even goes like even more local, i.e. San Fran and Palo Alto, and it can go even more local, i.e. one street in Palo Alto that basically has like, all the VCs that you can imagine in the US, and they have the biggest pockets, and they're the ones who actually can like continue to fund and finance most of those companies. So most French VCs, if they would never do a flip if there's no financing that goes after that. But if there's a financing that goes after that, it means for them that their chance of exit, the chance of multiple, just becomes much higher.
So do you agree with this? And so now you've decided you go to the US. How do you prepare for this? Do you go? You had YC to help with networking. What did you add that helped you get there?
I had this guy. I had to say this. So yeah, we're in the B2B business. Again, consumer is different, but in the B2B business, I had no network. So one thing we've been doing regularly is to hire consultants. Every time we open a new market, usually we hire a consultant, and I go on a tour, and I try to meet as many people as possible from the ecosystem, so that I get an understanding whether A, is there a product fit, 2, is there a demand for my product, and 3, can I sell it? These 3 steps may sound stupid and simple, but they're very, very important. So we hired a consultant back. So I moved 2 months ago, and we hired the consultant spring. And before that, I was spending half of my time in New York and the other half here. So, really trying to get a deep dive into it. And we decided to go ahead and actually open the office in New York only after I did that due diligence. It was quite deep and quite thorough, and it was very necessary because, as you said, you don't sell the product the same way. It could be the same tech, but the way you pitch it is so different. We in Europe, we sell tech, and everybody is happy to buy tech because we love technology. American people do love tech, but they love, more importantly, the benefit and the end goal. And the end goal in the US is money. So we had to translate every single piece of features that we have into, translatable revenue, something they would really gauge and measure. And if that is a big uplift and big enough, they would jump. If it's not big enough, they're gonna say, I love your Ferrari, but I'm happy with my Chevy. Or I can't afford it. Or you know what, I don't have the money now to buy the Ferrari, come back in a year. So you have to understand those low signals that the people are sending out, because Americans are very welcoming and they say, hey, great, awesome product, I love it, see you next year, or something like that. And you feel like, wow, I'm gonna close a deal, and you're not closing anything because there's no very strong signal. So it's very important to get that culture as well, especially if you end up selling something to somebody face to face.
Yeah, when we talked a little before this panel, we all expressed the same things, that people don't sell things the same way. In France, the scale is from bad to average, and in the US it's from good to excellent. So when a French guy gets in the US, he hears his product is good, and he's like, I'm gonna have the contract for sure, and then he has no answer and no answer and no answer. It's something you need to get used to, and they all had the same issues. And they indeed are looking for translated cache for every free feature. I was discussing with Julien just before, and he was saying like it's pretty easy to set up A/B testing with a company on this product, and if they win money, they go for it. In France, it would take weeks before having any chest.
It's a totally different culture. Even the size of the meeting, the length of the meeting, we have seen crazy thing in the US, like starting to pitch a product 20 minutes after the meeting was finished, the product was sold, and the implementation was done 1 week after. It was in production, and it was a big company. So it can go very, very fast. Actually, the process of selling can be amazing comparing to France, where it takes a lot of time sometimes. But you have to pitch it in terms of the value, the benefits, and not in terms of text. Definitely, it's a different way to sell it. And the value for us, it's something that we have learned too. It's a different way to for them to perceive the increase of conversion of revenue at the end. And most of the time, we propose them an A/B test. So after sometimes few days of A/B test, they see that there is a huge increase of revenue. So there is no barrier to pay the service. The revenue are there, so it's pretty clear for them that there is some value.
There's also one more thing I would like to add on what you're saying, Julien, is customers get a lot more inbound requests because the market is so big. There are so many startups out there that every single customer you want to target has probably received 10 inbound emails in a single day. And most of the sales pitch goes through first an email. So you have to be crisp in your messaging so that your email makes it to the top. And so first you have to have a good, short, concise email that is resonating with the customer or the prospect. 2, you have to have a crazy, short, crisp, clear, business-oriented 20-minute pitch. Actually 10-minute pitch and 10-minute questions. And in Europe, we're used to 1 hour meeting long. In the US, it's 20 to 30 minutes. I don't know how it's on the West Coast, but on the East Coast, New York is like 20, 30 minutes. And you have even time to talk about the weather and yesterday's baseball game and whatever, right? So it's like amazing how much you can do in 20 minutes. But you have to be extremely, not aggressive, but very efficient, absolutely.
And they're able to say yes at the end of 20 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, just the good news means that you can actually email somebody and they'll respond to you, which is not always the case in Europe, right? So that means that what I've noticed from a lot of French entrepreneurs is that you come with like all the background and the scars that you've gotten here, where you send an email and nobody responds for like 6 months, a year or something like that. Imagine that in the US, you can email the number 3 of a company and they might respond to you, and maybe they don't respond to you immediately, then you send an email the following week. On average in the US, it is considered that it takes 6 to 7 touch points, interactions, before you actually might get a meeting. So, and most people fail because they stop after the first email. But they understand that. So they're not gonna get like mad because you're like, like going after them. They'll just consider that you're like, hungry and that you actually want to get their business. So that's the good news about the US. That means that it's actually possible to get into those accounts. The bad news is that indeed they'll say, hey, it's great to everything, and it won't mean anything. So you need to like learn either through a consultant or when you go to YC and like to basically immerse yourself with Americans. And it's hard when you're French and you're coming there, and likely most people are French, but it's very important for you to not like just stay with French people, but like really immerse yourself, speak to as many Americans as possible, actually hang out with some of them. And like the US is the country of networking. So as long as you like, some examples that I usually give people is there's 3 moments that I used to take, even when I was working at a startup, It was breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or drinks. And I would see a different person at pretty much like, I would probably see about 9 different people throughout a week on top of my actually work. And as long as you keep like those relationships and you keep like pushing at them, that builds a network for you. And it's like a painful process, especially when you start from nowhere, but it's something that's actually possible in the US. It's not something that's as natural in France. In the US, it's something that people are like actually understand, as long as you give them some value also in return.
And being part of the ecosystem is super important. We started to go on a regular basis in the US 1 year before starting YC. But the impact of YC and being part of the ecosystem on our pitch, on our behavior, on the networking was just huge in few weeks. We did not get this impact with the previous weeks of travel in the US. It's really been part of the ecosystem, have a lot of interaction with everyone, been in the meetups, talk to a lot of different startups, and just change the way to interact with them. And present and pitch and interact with just anyone. It's pitching all the time, even the taxi driver to go to the airport.
Yeah, no, so I met a French startup that came, spoke to me for 15 minutes. Then we like got into questions. At the end of the meeting, I basically said, like just as a piece of feedback, you should probably like have your pitch to be like shorter and crisper. And the person got back to me and she was like, I wasn't actually pitching. Like I knew like we got to meet each other before, and I was like, okay, so that's already the wrong mentality. Indeed, in the US, you're pitching everybody every time. If you can tell the grandma that's sitting next to you in one sentence what you're doing, that means you're not doing something right? So you're all the time networking and pitching in the US. So it might not sound very natural, very friendly, but it does mean that like everybody is always representing something. And you need to make sure that you represent correctly what your company does, because you don't really have that many touch points that you can like help, right? So if you meet me only once, that first impression, especially in the US, is critical. So make sure that you pitch them, make sure that you craft your pitch. Indeed, test it once, test it twice, test it with like grandma and the baker, and if it doesn't work, change it, and then test it with somebody else. Test it first with like your family, your friends, anybody that you know, maybe somebody who's American who came to your school at one point. Any one of those things, prepare yourself and train, and constantly do it to the point where you can do it like no problem in one sentence and know what you say, and people are going to be like, wow, I get it. I think that's critical.
What's the real goal of this? Is it to train your pitch, or is it to meet potential clients, or is it to meet potential investors?
Well, you never know.
Oh, you
right?
never know.
So
okay.
The person who's sitting next to you, so I'll take Palo Alto, right? So Palo Alto is like a very tiny city. There's a coffee shop there that's called Coupa Café. It's a coffee shop, right? So you have students, you have anybody and anything you want. You also have like amongst the most influential VCs in the world. You might not know who this person is. You might not know who they know. You never know. But like in the US, if I'm the aunt of somebody who's very influential and I actually like your pitch, I might say, you know what, my nephew, this is what he does. If you want, I can make the intro. So just keep in mind, this is you're representing your company, and so that's why you want to pitch people. And it's like people in the US consider that like a big difference in venture capital, for example, is here there's a lot of people who are helping you raise money. It doesn't exist in the US because investors consider that the job of a CEO, the job of an entrepreneur is to sell. And it's to sell not just like their investors, it's to sell your employees, to show them how passionate you are about what you're doing, what's your vision, so that you onboard as many employees. And in the US, it's even more important because they're very fickle. They can like leave at like the whims, like, any time. So you need to always convince them and sell them what's your vision and everything. So that's the first one. Second one is selling your prospects and your customer. And third one is selling your investors. So you're selling to everybody all the time. That's why it's like very critical.
So you mentioned recruiting. How different is recruiting in the US than in France, and how did you adapt to the difference?
Okay, I'll go first. We're early in the process, but recruiting for startups in the US is super competitive. It's a highly competitive process, even for American companies. So if you're a European company, you're essentially a no-name company. So it's even harder. And I'm using this word here in Europe. I would not use it in the US. The sexiness of a European company is super low. We are not appealing to Americans. You need to think like, yeah, maybe the accent, yeah. I mean, sometimes I feel Americans live on an island and they are not really recognizing what's happening outside of the US. So good or bad, that's the way it is. And so really, I've found myself, you know, being interviewed more than I'm actually interviewing candidates. So I'm usually being interviewed the first time I meet a candidate, so I'm really selling hardcore the company, what we're doing, blah, blah, blah. I'm asking like 2 questions. And then if the candidate is really excited about the opportunity, the second time we meet, I start interviewing the candidate. But if I start interviewing the candidate, like in the first round, I'm not gonna cut it because usually he's gonna say, I know nothing about the company, it's not exciting. So that's a big issue. The second issue is if you get a little bit of a name, you would attract some people, but they are not necessarily the A-level ones you want. So the A-level ones usually have a job and they are, you know, being well paid. So you have to be able to, you know, climb up the ladder to really be able to attract those guys, and that's hard. So our solution right now, we've initially we wanted to hire an MD to run the best show in the US. Like, you know, we're gonna hire the big guy from a big company and it's gonna hire a great team and it's gonna be all great. Well, in the end, we changed our mind and we decided to build it from the ground up. So we are hiring salespeople who are building the baseline revenue, and then once we get a name, we'll be going up the ladder and tapping into the bigger names.
So for us, it's maybe a bit different. As we were part of YC, we have a user base there. We have 60% of our business in the US, so we have a small name. It's not a big brand, but it's a bit known. But definitely there is a huge difference of scale. When you have an interview in the US, all the candidates are great in terms of the way they present themselves, the way they pitch themselves. So you have to dig more in all the details of the different skills they have and their experiences. For us, one of the key things at the beginning, so there is several, but one of the key was to have one of the founders installed in the US, because it's huge to show to the US employees that one of the founders is dedicated to the success of the US company. And the second one was to have a US guys in the interview process to help us kind of analyze and filter more efficiently the candidates. At the beginning, it was very difficult for us to just make the difference between an A candidate and a B or C one. It was really difficult to just get the difference between a good pitch and a good candidate, because all of them are very good in pitching themselves. And it was very difficult. We have made several errors in recruiting at the beginning. So failing fast is a good thing too. Stopping and actually the legislation is a bit more flexible in the US on this point. But definitely having the help of someone is key. One of our investors in the US helped us a lot in the interview process. So each time we got US candidates, he was part of the interview process and he helped us to just get a concrete and honest feedback of all the candidates.
I mean, of all the startups that are in the US right now that I spoke to, most of them will tell you that within a year they pretty much have replaced all the first employees that they've actually hired, because they just indeed have like a very low level of like, you know, reading on like the quality of the candidates that they're actually meeting. The second point that I think, like Hervé mentioned, but it's really critical for anybody who's currently thinking about moving to the US, is that thinking that you're just going to open the US, have a country manager, and that country manager is going to do everything is a very risky move, because again, as we said, the US is very different than France, and so unless you know how it's actually going to work in the US, and that you can actually then like, so Hervé has actually been selling for the past like 6 months. in the US. If he hires anybody now, he knows what to look for. He knows how to assess them. He knows how to manage them. And if you don't actually have that, the problem you have is you won't be able to actually see if it's a good salesperson or a bad salesperson, because they'll come back to you and they'll tell you, those are all the objections that the client gave me, and you won't know whether this is bullshit or whether this is actually true. And that's why I think it's so critical if you actually decide to move to the US, you actually like, maybe not build everything from the ground up, but actually be, there and actually start like trying recruiting people, trying selling to customers, trying to do all those things as if it was a new startup all over again. Because otherwise it's going to be almost impossible for you to manage American people in that same process. So congrats, Hervé.
And at the end, the market is different, the price, the salary are very different. Don't try to just translate your French salary or your French scale to the US one. You just need to get the French one, the US one, and don't be afraid to have a huge salary in the US. You just don't want to get the candidate that accepts a low salary. At the end, it's not the good choice. You prefer to have the candidate which wants a high salary but is a candidate.
Yeah, on that, there are a couple of things that we learned. So our rule of thumb right now is to multiply by 2.5. So if we pay somebody 100 here, we're going to be paying that person in New York 250. The other key learning for us is we don't look for the same talents in the US than we do in Europe. In Europe, when you start a company, you look for people who are like multitasking or able to do task A, B, and C, while in the US, you would have somebody who would do A, somebody else will do B, and a third person would do C. And they would basically excel in A, B, and C, but they will be unable, respectively, all of them, but they will be unable to do A, B, and C as one person. So you need to budget that, and you need to be able to basically slice your job desk in smaller pieces so that you end up finding the right person. And I think it goes back to the market. The labor market is way more liquid, and people need to be a little bit more interchangeable as well. Because people move on, they may leave the company. That's my conclusion. Maybe I'm wrong here, but at least having fine-grained job desks allows you to replace those people more easily.
So you said that after a year, basically most startups have all their employees gone. Is it really because they made mistakes, or is it also because they were not able to retain the best talents?
Of the startups that I spoke to, it was mainly because those were not the talents they needed. It's it's like a mix of. So I'll give a few examples. Most of them tended to be B2B, but to Hervé's point, and it was at like a later stage in the life of the company. But they basically hired salespeople that they thought, again, were capable of understanding how to sell. Whereas in the US, a lot of salespeople, when you're really at the point of selling, you need to tell them how to sell. It's a product, it does A, B, C, and that's what it is, and this is how you sell it, this is the little pitch that you need to make, and go. And for a lot of the French people who are more used to like some of the French salespeople who are apparently, not that I actually know, but like from what they say, are a lot more flexible in terms of like finding a different way to sell, they're more creative in the way that they're selling. That was a big difference, and so those differences, they only see that as they actually hire people. So it tended to be mainly mistakes. And again, they're not mistakes. I mean, they're learnings. That's the way I look at them, right? Because you have to be there to understand those differences. The only question is how fast you learn and how fast you realize it's a mistake. That's just
So you need quite a lot of cash to really start in the US. I guess you all three agree on that.
Yeah, or you need to be like surrounded by people who can, help you in terms of making. So YC is a perfect example, right? So like being surrounded by people who can just like accelerate the process of understanding the differences between those two things. And the more startups, and at least in New York, there's a very strong French startup ecosystem. So the more you also just speak to a lot of those people to understand what was their experience, what did they do wrong, and every one of those things, the faster you learn about like how to change. The only thing you have to do is to realize that you're not different than them, so you likely will make the same mistakes. If you just come there and say like, yeah, well, I'll do something different, I'll be like better at like recruiting, then you'll fail. But if you realize that they're like as smart as you are, if not smarter, and they made those mistakes, just learn from them and try to do something different. Ask their advice. Maybe for one of them, ask one of the French, founders who's there to like, be involved in one of the recruiting if you don't know an American person, just to like get, again, like a different point of view and not be alone when you're there.
There is one point we didn't talk about at all is visas. Do you think it's a big issue when you move to the US, or is it something manageable?
For us, at least, it takes some time. At the end, it was pretty long to get a visa, but it's not something that has a huge impact on the success or not. If it's planned and we started with a B1 visa that we got in 1 week. It cost 200 euros, so it's pretty cheap. It was okay to go in the US for 6 months, so it's pretty easy to start. Then to be a permanent resident in the US and to be allowed to work, you need a permanent visa. This one is more expensive and takes some time, but at the end, with a good lawyer, and then again, it's a question of having the good immigration lawyer. It's just a question of price and some delay. Of course, it will take probably 6 months to get it, but at the end, it was not a huge. At the end, it was not the most complex problem to solve for us.
I would say I've had better experiences than the visa process, but so I got an investor's visa, E2. To make a long story short, you need to build a crazy business plan that is not the one you're pitching to your investors, it's the one you pitch to the immigration here in Paris. It doesn't look like the one you pitch to anyone else. And they ask funny questions like you have to have a committed lease, not like, you can't work at WeWork, you can't rent a desk on a weekly basis or monthly basis. It has to be a long-term commitment. You have to wire cash. In our case, it was a big amount of cash to your bank account. You have to spend that money as quickly as possible. So that's not the difficult part, but it's still money, right? And in my case, it was also very important because I'm married and I wanted my wife to be able to work. And the E2 visa gives her the ability to work also. So she has to now go through a little process that takes 90 days, and eventually she'll be. Does it
include spending your money?
Well, that's why she needs to work, right? So it's 6 months. It took us 6 months. It needs to be planned ahead of time, and again, the bigger the company is, the more work it is. It's not something you need to be taking lightly. I know people who got denied at the immigration, and it needs work, preparation, and choose the right lawyer. And I would go even further, choose the right lawyer for your visa, because E2 is different than any other visa when it comes to mine, and you have to hire the right lawyer.
Okay, great.
There's one more thing I would like to add.
Please.
Unlike you, I've never been a student in the US.
That's the easiest way.
Right, that's probably the easiest way. So I didn't have a social security number, and that changes your life. If you have to have a social security number for everything.
And credit history.
And credit history, but that comes after. So if you want to open a bank account, you need a social security number. If you want a mobile phone, not like a prepaid plan, but a long-term plan, you have to have a social security number. You want to buy a car, you want to rent an apartment, you need a social security number for everything. So once you get your visa, go to the US, stay a week. After a week, you can go to the Social Security office, and then they'll start the process. And the next time you come back, you get your Social Security number card actually right at that very moment, and you can start a normal life. In my case, it took me about 3-4 weeks to get my Social Security number, and it was a kind of complex process. So it's, little things like this. You speak to the people who've done it before, because there are tons of tiny details which are pretty painful if you're not prepared. If you're prepared, it's super easy.
Now, I mean, the credit history is actually very important because that's when you realize that you actually have to have money to be in the US. Because if you actually go and like rent an apartment, and that for whatever reason the company is not actually the guarantor for the apartment, then the landlord is actually capable of looking at you and saying, it's okay, then you have to pay me 1 year in advance for the rent if you want to actually stay in my apartment. So the US is the land of opportunity, but it's not always the most welcoming land that exists. They're making it pretty hard to actually move there, but once you're there, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, if you're in the system, it's fine. Get into the system.
At the end, to build a global business, the visa problem is actually the same as close to any country. We have Americans that come in France to work in Paris. Actually, the visa process is kind of similar for American people that want to come in France. It's kind of the same delay, the same complexity. So, and I don't even speak about finding a flat to a US guy in Paris without any salary history in France. At the end, the problem is kind of similar between France and US to get a visa and get to work. So it's more about building a global business and having people working from different countries in one office. And it needs time. It requires good lawyers in any case, even in France. It needs to be planned, and at the end, with a lot of time, it's something that you can solve.
So before we let the room ask some questions, do you all have like one mistake they should all avoid if they want to make it to the US? One mistake they should all avoid, like your one.
For me, if you have a global business and US is a good market for you, you should do the flip super early or even build the company in the US.
I'm not sure it's a mistake, but it's maybe more an advice. I would say be very humble. It's maybe a little bit paradoxical, but you have to be in a way very aggressive and at the same time super humble. You can be, as you said earlier, number one in your class in Europe, but you're just nobody in the US. And you have to get this in your head, otherwise it's going to be hard. That's my advice.
I don't know that I have like one mistake to avoid. I would say like the main thing is just keep in mind 2 different cultures, 2 different countries. And as long as you like keep that in mind, you'll realize that when you go there, you're actually not making any assumptions. That's the worst that can actually happen. For you to make assumption of how it's going to work, how it works there, how like people like behave. If you go there and you're ready to like actually learn something new, then it should not be a problem.
And the good thing about having 2 different cultures is that in the end, they don't understand Europe at all either. And once you made it there any year, you're better suited to conquer the rest of the world, better than any Americans. So thank you all. Thank you for all the time. Now the room can ask questions, put in his ear. And so just raise your hands.
Yeah, hi, I'm kind of the opposite of Paul. I'm an American who's been living in Paris for 10 years. I have a couple of just minor cultural points that you touched on. One is, first of all, on networking. In the US, no introduction is necessary, unlike in France. That was a shock to me that I needed to be introduced to people. And also to know in the US, the first question people ask you is, what do you do? And when they say, what do you do, that's an opportunity to pitch. The second thing is on hiring. They don't have CDE. The concept does not exist. I never had a job contract until I came to France. It's hire and fire at will. People change jobs frequently, like they change clothes. And then the final thing is perhaps a little bit more to round out what you're talking about. And the conversation is very East and West Coast centric. I'm from Austin, Texas, which is another super huge tech hub. And the cost of living in Texas is very low. It is very connected, and it's a completely different ecosystem there. It's very supportive. Houston is the most international city in the US, and that's very close by. So I would encourage people to look also in Austin because the incubators there are actively recruiting international companies.
Yeah, just one thing. What you just said is actually the complete reason why French people, including the three of us, are very East and West Coast like focused. So we basically know New York, LA, and San Fran. Sometimes Miami, just because like we might go there for like vacation. Austin is indeed like Miami is not a big tech hub. Don't go there. Austin is indeed one of the biggest tech hub besides the two coasts, including like amongst the biggest companies there. I think Dell. Right, and now it's like even bigger with EMC. So indeed, don't like focus yourself just on like East and West Coast. However, I would say that the closest culture I've experienced, and I have been to Austin, the closest culture that I've experienced to Europe is probably New York. Living in San Fran, or worse than that, in Palo Alto, is actually really living an American life. It's like very suburban and everything, and it's a very big difference culturally than like living in Paris. And so I think that you should keep that in mind. Personally, I spent 2 years in Palo Alto. I would never live in Palo Alto, ever, ever, ever. I would never live in San Francisco with only one ever after that. I mean, it's just very particular. I just love New York. But again, San Francisco is not too far. It is 1 hour. And with the traffic, it might be 2 hours sometimes. And the second thing is San Francisco is also less European than New York. Right? So New York is like, in my opinion, right? New York is a lot more cosmopolitan, for example, than like many other cities in the US.
And between New York and San Francisco, usually you choose depending on the industry you work in, which is the main decision for going east or west. The other thing would be managing, and Austin, of course. And the other thing would be managing teams on both sides of the ocean. And it's way easier with 6 hours than 9. But when you have no choice and you need to be in the valley, you're in the valley. Question?
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Balthazar. Thank you very much for your talking. I've been in the United States for 4 times and go in Arkansas, but I love Arkansas because Arkansas is very boring, you know. My question is, when you are French people and you want to start in some like business in the United States, how to make customer training, and then when you make customer training, American accent is very important because sometimes when I talk with some people. When I use, for example, my common or general accent, many people don't really understand me when I talk about or pitch my startup. That's my question.
So, unfortunately, if you do have an accent, even a French accent, however is like deep is the accent, I think that it's harder for anybody as like Americans to actually understand. So that requires just more like efforts. I don't know that there's a solution to that besides like trying to train yourself to speak with like less of an accent. But it is a reality. I think that even when you pitch, and as horrible as it might sound, sometimes I ask French people to pitch me in English, and I actually sometimes realize myself that I get tired of trying to understand what they're trying to say, because it just requires more like effort. So it is difficult, I think.
I personally have a huge French accent, and it's something you can improve always. The only problem is that sometimes you can pronounce one word and you think the pronunciation is okay, and actually it's not. So people cannot understand what you are saying. In this case, of course, you need to improve your pronunciation, definitely. It's an endless job. It's something you need to improve all the time. For me, one of the things that was key was, first of all, we only speak English at the office. So we speak English all the time. We are in an English culture. And of course, I am some lessons. There is Maria at TheFamily that can help you. Definitely, anyone can help you to improve your accent. It's something that you can definitely improve. I don't have any record of me speaking several years ago, but I'm pretty sure there is always a big difference. And it's definitely something you can improve.
You can also joke about it. I mean, it's not, I mean, seriously, it's like something where just play with it, right? I'm like, when I say that I'm French, when I say something really mean, then, and I'm gonna, forgive me for that, then I say, I'm sorry, I'm French, I'm an asshole. But that way, they actually, like, so many things are forgiven when you actually, like, joke about those things, that many things are possible after that. Second thing is my wife is American. She keeps a tally. She has actually on her phone all the expressions that I say badly, and then she replays them to me on a regular basis. So to show you how mean she is, she's not here tonight. She's in the US, but she does that, and it forces you really to, like, rethink how you have to pronounce those things, right? So just have people keep you honest, and just, like, when they correct you, don't be offended, don't be anything, just realize, okay, that was the wrong pronunciation, I'm just going to switch it, and I'm going to say it differently next time.
I think there was one element, there was one element of the question which was about the customer service and support as well. A customer training, yeah. So let me step back before we talk about the US. Again, we are a European company. We operate out of Paris, but we have customers all over Europe. So already our common language is English. The main issue that we face today here in Paris, it's improving, but it's still a big issue, is hire good people who speak good English or good enough English. And sometimes we have to put English like before we look at any other skills, which is a shame because, again, it shrinks down the pool of candidates. We even conduct interviews here in Paris in English. We have Americans here in Paris in our office, and they also take part of the interview process. And yes, as you said, they went through the pain of the French visa. That's very important. And then when it comes to customer training and services in the US particularly, they are not very familiar with foreign accents. In New York they are, but still, it's part of, they expect a certain level of English. So what we're doing right now is all the salespeople are American, the back office are French in Paris, but we'll be moving that over to New York as well, so that we have local people who speak the proper American accent. Yeah, that's it. But it's an investment.
I would say that the accent is not an issue for customer service, customer support, if they are able to understand well what people are saying. At the end, if you have users worldwide, you will have a ton of different English accents, like Indian, Japanese, or Nordic countries. They all have a different accent. The only thing is that is your accent so strong that people are not able to understand what you are saying? In this case, of course, it's for us, we have kind of the same thing. English is, for us, in terms of skill, pretty high in the list. And we have people with an accent. The only question is, are they able to answer technical question or customer question? And is the customer able to understand them?
This is Laurent from Eventia. We have created an innovative solution to organize professional events, and we have some clients in Europe, in Latin America, and in North America already, and we would like to get incorporated in the US as soon as possible. So our question is, should we get some funding in France first and then look for other funding in the US next, or should we go straight to the point in the US, look for our first round of funding?
I would say that if you do not have any investment today, it will be easier to have your company in the US, and you can raise money later on in any country, even in France. People are used to invest in the US, but the opposite is not true. If you have your company in France and want to have US investor, it will be more complex.
Is your company already incorporated?
We can discuss your specific afterwards if you want. But basically, it's the sooner you go there, if you want US investors at one point, it's the better. Then it depends on if you gave stock options, if you fundraised, if you're incorporated, where your clients are. So you need a good lawyer also. Yeah.
York. What would be the first steps? Yes, New York or the Valley. In terms of practicality, okay? It's difficult to move your business to the US. It's difficult to have the right partners. Are there any specific networks? And by networks, I don't mean only French networks, because French entrepreneurs tend to stick together in foreign countries, but American networks that you advise people here to join.
I don't know of any American network that you can really like join to like help that, right? So I do advise you actually join the French networks, but you actually use that as a stepping stone to get to the American network. So what I've noticed amongst French people is that it's like promotion classes, right? So you've got the ones who just arrived, the one who arrived like 3 to 4 years ago, the one who arrived like 7 to like 8 years ago. You just like go and like try to meet people in all those different classes, because the one who've been there for like 7 to 8 years, they likely have a lot of like American like friends. You don't stick just to French people for the rest of your life. If you really spend like 8 to 10 years in the US, you fundamentally like like integrate yourself into society, but play to your advantage, right? So like, French people, just go to meet them and then try to get from them to the American person that they might actually know in the industry that they actually know. Just like ask as many questions to get intros, to get all those things. That's the way you start the network. I don't know of any association per se that you could join. Like within the ones that you could join within French people, there's French founders that now is like very like, strong, especially in New York, opening in San Fran also. But the other thing I would say is just like, start there and then get to know American people from there. The other thing that I suggest is, and it's something that I was looking at one point, is go on LinkedIn, try to look for anybody who actually has studied in France, but actually is a French person who's working in an American company. Try to get to know them, try to get to meet them, right? If it's in an industry that you actually like, know, play to your advantage. I mean, we're French, so and there's something to play with, right? So just leverage that. Get to know the French people who are already very integrated. Start from them, and then they'll know other people. It will take time, and I don't think there's any magic formula for you to like go and just register to like a specific association that's like that's American that like helps that specifically. I mean, not that I know. Or get accepted to YC.
Yeah, personally, we have started just with LinkedIn, so we have used network of people that maybe we have worked in the past and have moved to the US. And then, of course, YC is a huge difference. So any program like Y Combinator, 500 Startup, Techstar, or an existing network of startup of companies that are pretty international, and joining such a network has a big networking effect, for sure. You are part of a community that you can use. So personally, we are part of 500 Startup and Y Combinator. So it's two different networks in the US that we can use. We are part of those networks. We have companies that we follow. We have a network of connections there. So of course, it helps a lot.
Connect with the French companies that have actually gone there, like Algolia, and then ask them and piggyback on their networking if you haven't been accepted to those networks. I'm like very serious about it. Like the US is based on the principle of hustle. So if you don't hustle, there's many other people who are hustling like besides you, right? So just go there. Like it happened to me to just like cold call somebody or cold email somebody and say, hi, I'm really interested in what you're doing. As long as you're phrasing it as like, I'm interested in like learning more about what you're doing, and I want to like invite you for coffee, there's a lot of people who will say yes. So you just have to hustle, pitch anywhere you go. If you go to like, a party where you're invited and maybe there's a lot of other American people, ask them, what do you do? And if you know what to do, then continue and try to learn more from them. And then from that, like tell them that you want to meet them for coffee, maybe in a week from now. And then try to, again, like it takes time, but like this is to me the only way that like you can build a true and strong network.
Hi, I just want to say first, thank you to all of you for sharing your experience. I have a lot of respect about what you've done so far. My question is, Paul, you talked about multitasking. You said multitasking is not really recognized as an important skill in the US. Why do you think, what makes you say that? Because I have the feeling that multitasking is pretty important. I've lived in Mountain View for about 2 years, and I think, I mean, what's your idea? Why do you think multitasking is not as important as in France?
Okay, so you want to take?
No, he said Paul.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, hi, I'm Hervé. And so, no, I don't remember saying that. Oh, Hervé, you said it, you see? But he said Paul. So, no, answer. Why do you think...
Go ahead.
Well, so no, but he said pause. That's why I said so. Like, I don't think multitasking is not something that's American, but I think that like at an early stage in a lot of startups that are Americans, they're all doing a lot of things. At a later stage, when you hire some like jobs for like sell people and everything, they know how to do something very specifically, and they know that very, very well. So it depends on the stage, right? So I think that the remark was not about the fact that Americans don't know how to multitask. It's just that they sometimes specialize a lot more than like what we do in France.
Yeah, actually, you are using the word I wanted to use. It is exactly that. They're a lot more specialized, and it's about scaling. When you reach a point in your lifetime, in the company reaches a certain size, if you want to go to the next level, you have to have more specialized people. If you have too many multitaskers or too many non-experts, they are good at a lot of things, but they are not expert in one thing. And if you really want to scale, you have to have experts. And I think the American, one thing I'm learning is they are good at scaling companies. And how do they do that? Because they specialize. And they want to be the best at that one thing, and they want to excel in it. If you do too many things, you never excel in any one of them. So I agree with Paul, in the very early stage of the company, you may want to have non-experts or, like Swiss Army knife people. But as you grow, you need to specialize.
I definitely agree. It's a question of stage. At the beginning, you hire more people which are multitasking or have a lot of different responsibility. The only exception I see is when you hire your first VP of marketing or VP of sales. One of the mistakes we have made in the past is to hire someone that was very good in one specific domain, but didn't have any idea of all the different responsibility of the VP position. So it's probably the only exception I would make is for the VP position. You need someone that is not only an expert on one specific thing, but have a more general knowledge of the position of the company. It's very different for a VP position.
I totally agree with that.
Me too.
My name is Isaac Essayag, and I represent an accounting firm from the US called KVB, located in New York. I think it's a first hub to create connections. Everybody needs accounting, needs legal advisors, needs. So I think it's a good start for networking, as the company has today has been about for the past 25 years. They know pretty well the US market. We have about 400 or 500 French companies, from the biggest one to the smallest one. Many startups also, and it's a very good point to start. It's KVB Partners. Maybe you know Salomon Capeta, so I represent them in Paris. So if you need some information, I would be happy to help.
That's something you're going to realize in the US, is that everyone you work with is really way more open to open its own networks. Yeah. So lawyers are going to connect you with investors, and lawyers are going to connect you with other clients they have, which is something we don't usually do here in France. So be open to that in the US.
I just wanted to add one more thing. I personally had an experience of moving to the US in the late 80s. So it's a long time ago, and I know a little bit. I went through the VC raising money and everything, but everything has changed so much from what you said. And I would like to ask a question about what could we learn from the Israeli startup scene. It's interesting to see how they are very successful. and why they are so successful comparing to French. We are also, I think it's a good experience to learn from.
It's a very different scene for like many reasons. Israel has like the army that supports a lot of the R&D. Israel has like a lot of like technology, like universities that are like very like recognized worldwide. But I think the big difference between Israel and France is that Israel is a tiny country, which basically means that no entrepreneur in Israel thinks about Israel as like their market. They just think as Israel is like their place to do the R&D and the engineering, and almost immediately, if not like from the first like experience, they're actually building the company. They're and the headquarters in the U.S. and they basically operate as like an American company. The other thing is that the legal system in Israel is actually much closer to the U.S. than the French system. So it facilitates also for a lot of American investors to understand that. So I think those are big. I think in France, the great thing is this is like France is a very successful country. It's a very like big country in so many ways, but it's a very small market when you want to be a global company. And so the problem sometimes is some entrepreneurs think that I'm going to start in France, and then after that, I'll move to the US. And so, again, depending on the company, the industry, the stage, the person, and all those things, this might not be always the best choice. But, I mean, there's a lot to learn from the Israeli scene. Like, there was recently, most of the people, I think Emmanuel Macron actually went to Israel to try to actually, like, learn from it. Trying to replicate an ecosystem, like most people are saying, how do we do the Silicon Valley in France or in Paris? It's almost impossible. Silicon Valley is the mix between like, Stanford, all the big companies are there. There's like, it's a self-fulfilling like, cycle. If your startup doesn't work, well, Google will buy you. Facebook will buy you. There's like a lot of those things that are actually happening that we don't always have in France. So it's going to take time to actually like build a different ecosystem, and we don't have to replicate the Silicon Valley or Israel. We just have to find our system that actually can be successful. And to just say something about, and I know you're not like as a big fan of them, but I've just discovered them. I think BPI or BPI is actually like a fascinating institution in France because there's very little private VCs in France. There's not a lot of financing, and the fact that the state through like BPI is actually helping to fill the gaps in between all the financing chain in France is actually something that I think is like very, very interesting, and that doesn't happen in many countries. Now, the question will be, as we get more success, as we get people who are going to get richer and richer, and they'll become maybe VCs or they'll become investors in VCs and all those things, maybe then the BPI, won't need to exist. But for now, I think this is actually like one way for us to have an ecosystem that's actually different than everybody else, but actually very interesting.
And that's what TheFamily is also trying to build.
And TheFamily is amazing for that.
Next question.
Yeah, hello. I represent a startup that's creating smart search engine for the restaurant industry. So we would need a lot of partnerships with companies in the West Coast. And at the same time, our developer base is located in Paris and not especially ready to move to the US. What would you think would be the best way to build our equity? And should we really have the offices in the US to represent ourselves very early? Or should we stay in France for the moment and then expand later on?
It's depends. If your users and if your ecosystem is in the US, I think you need to be there. You don't need to have all the company installed in the US. I think it's totally okay to have the R&D in France, but you need to have a culture in your company very early on it needs to be a global culture. You need to have people that are ready to work and manage 9 hours of time difference. Manage the US culture and so on. And if you install this global culture in your company early on, I think it's definitely can be a success to be in 2 different countries. But I think you need to be in the US if your customers are there at one point.
we'll have one last question.
So thank you for your hints. My question is, I don't want you to think that I missed the point. Is what about considering moving in Asia before going to the US? Because when we talk about going in the US, it's basically for two reasons: capital and the market. Historically, the US is the best for capital, and the market is larger than Europe, especially in France, and more dynamic. But when we look at economic data, we see that Asia, and especially China, the middle class is growing. And also, there are more and more VCs, and we can read a lot of articles in TechCrunch or VentureBeat talking about crazy valuations in the tech industry. So my question is, what about going first in Asia and in China? And I know your expertise is more in the US, but what do you think of that perspective?
So I personally lived in Asia. So before starting this company, I was based in Asia. I lived only 2 years in Hong Kong. I wished I had lived longer, but the subprime crisis hit bad also in Asia back then. I had a team of 100 people scattered all over Asia, so 12 offices. So I know I've been to Japan, Korea, China, Taiwan, Singapore, Southeast Asia, India, Australia. And Asia isn't one market. It's like Europe, but it's even worse than Europe because there are very strong cultural differences amongst each Asian countries. The Japanese cannot stand the Koreans cannot stand the Japanese. Japanese have issues with the Chinese. So you're better off, for example, managing Japan from the West Coast than you're managing Japan from anywhere else in Asia. Second, it's a very, it's not homogeneous at all. You know, Japan and Korea are very advanced. China is somewhere in the middle. The mid class is big. It's 500 million people. When I lived there were already 650 million phones out there in China, which is twice as many in the US as a whole. Southeast Asia is just still in its infancy. So all I'm trying to say is it's a very fragmented market. It highly depends what your product is all about. My product, the one I'm selling today, they're not even doing real-time bidding today. The market in the Western world is organized in publishers and advertisers and publishers and agencies. Over there, everybody does everything. So they don't even need what I'm doing. So going to the US is a big decision. Going to Asia is an even bigger one. And then the culture is yet very different. I remember when I was living there, we were all Westerners from the Asians, and we were all looking alike. And I remember that I didn't see much difference between a European and an American. Now I do remember there's a difference, but back then, the difference was so tiny compared to the Asian culture that you have to learn everything all the way down to the way you eat. And that's very important. You don't have to relearn how to eat in the US. You have to relearn all of that in Asia.
I mean, you eat a lot more in the US.
You eat more in the US though. I'm
true.
trying to not to, but
20 pounds when you move to the US.
Right. So it's a very special market. Yes, it's big, but it's not a light decision. It's a very big decision, very big.
Yeah, totally agree. It's definitely not one market. It's a lot of different markets. There is a huge difference of languages too. The number of people that actually speak and understand English, it's not the same than in Europe, definitely not. So you may have some languages problem. And there's a lot of different countries. If you are in the US and if you have an audience in the US, you will have some country in Asia that will be easier, like Australia, Singapore, and India that kind of follow the US. For other countries like Japan, Hong Kong, and a lot of different, like South Korea, it's a completely different market, which is not directly related to the US. So I don't think it's a question to going in Asia, it's going in one market and have a strategy to conquer the other market. It's a kind of similar in Europe. It's not because you are successful in France that you are in Germany. It's different markets. The reference that you can have in France that are pretty big can be unknown in Germany, a country which is very close. So it's different markets, and it's a different culture too. We have talked about culture between US and France, but even between France and Germany, there is difference. So it's different market.
Thank you very much for coming. I really want to thank you, Sri, for having this panel and this talk and entertaining everyone. Thank you very much.